Hello again, Sandwich and Cape Cod. I'm Greg Anderson. Did you know that in a matter of weeks, you will have a new sheriff here in Barnstable County? It will be the first time a new person will be taking this job in 23 years. There are two people running, and if my guest wins this race, she will be the first woman to ever hold this seat. But she's also talking about change, experience, public safety demands, and resources, and how they're allocated to 325 employees in 36 departments, a correctional facility. There's so much to talk about. Welcome, Donna Buckley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Greg. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Great, excellent. So first of all, is this your first time running for office?
Yes, it is. I am sort of proud to come to this campaign as not a politician.
Yeah.
This was not on my bucket list, but I saw a need and a reason to step forward, and I did.
What inspired you to make that decision to say, okay, I'm running?
So I spent the last 4 years working as the general counsel at the sheriff's office. One of the most fascinating positions that I've held in my 37 years of being a lawyer. I've always worked in the public sector, but this particular job gave me the opportunity to use all aspects of my experience. And as I was working there, what I saw was an entire field across the state, across our whole communities, of where it was becoming the center of our public policy discussions, criminal justice. So I started there. I got to see how much the philosophy of the sheriff is reflected in what happens at each sheriff's office in our Commonwealth.
Sure.
When the sheriff said he was retiring, this was not my first reaction to that news. I had
to jump into the race.
Not to jump into the race.
Yeah.
I had thought that I would be finishing my career, at the sheriff's office, but what I saw from being a member of our community was that there's a need for our sheriff's office to perform a service that's different than the one that we currently focus on.
Yeah.
And the only other person who was in this race was someone who was thinking that the model that we have now is the model that we should continue for the next 6 years. Yeah. And the person that had stepped forward, there was only one, and that would have sort of confined the conversation we wouldn't be talking about our sheriff's office right now.
Sure. Okay.
And the power of the sheriff's office and the role of the sheriff is critically important to how we feel safe. And it's also at the epicenter of the mental illness and addiction crises that we are experiencing all over the place.
We have so many things I want to talk to you about. Let's talk a little bit about, you had stated publicly that in your estimation, Sheriff Cummings' administration is operating as kind of a regional police agency. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So I know, because I've had conversations with many people who were around 24 years ago, that when Sheriff Cummings first ran for office, he ran on a platform of the sheriff's office being a law enforcement agency. What's important to understand is that the role of the sheriff in Massachusetts is different than what it might be believed to be in other states. The role of the sheriff in Massachusetts is correction, rehabilitation, and treatment. No other entity in our criminal justice system has the responsibility for the care and custody of inmates at the jail. Pretrial inmates, males, females, and sentenced inmates for misdemeanors and sort of lesser crimes. No other entity has that responsibility. That is the core mission of the sheriff's office from the big picture Commonwealth point of view.
Yeah.
But then you have sheriffs that are elected once every 6 years who are accountable only to the voters, and their philosophy, what they want to prioritize, becomes a big piece of what they bring.
Okay.
So he campaigned, as best I learned, on bringing a law enforcement focus. That continued through the time that I worked there, and since I left in March. Correction officers are being trained to be municipal police officers, which is a very different role than a correction officer. And my understanding from my opponent is that, he has a very police-focused identity to his campaign. He's dressed in his police uniform, and he's looking at making it a police agency. And that is somebody else already does that work.
Yeah.
Our municipal police do that work, our state police do that work, our environmental police do that work. I'm running because we need our jail and our sheriff's office to focus on its priorities.
So the focus on the correctional facilities and the sheriff's office, the department, is, in your opinion, calling out for a lot of change. Inmates before being released, mental health, addiction, all of those types of things. Can you break down what the priorities are? If you're on day one and you are now, Sheriff Buckley is in charge, you got the keys to the office, what is your priority by way of the changes you want to make?
So I look at it, and I describe it as reprioritizing. So if we have an absolute responsibility, we have a sacred responsibility of correction, rehabilitation, and treatment. We have resources that come from the state. We have a $30+ million budget. For me, this election is about how are we going to use those resources to make sure that when inmates are released from the Barnstable County Jail, that they're in a better place than when they came in. That, in one sentence, is the sacred responsibility of our sheriff. That's what every judge assumes is going to happen when they sentence someone. That's what every prosecutor is looking at. And if we're not doing that job, if we're using all of those resources to do other things, like pretend to be a police agency, or operate a boat, or train correction officers to be police officers, then we are failing in the core mission, and we are creating an environment where our community, the people who live here, are less safe because the people coming out of the Barnstable County Jail are going to recommit crimes. They're going to re-encounter our police. They're probably going to be another statistic, a recidivism statistic. They're going to eat up our tax dollars. It is much more expensive to keep rehousing someone and rearresting them and re-prosecuting them than it is to use the resources as best we can and target them in the first place. So
do you feel that they are those incarcerated that are being released or have been released over a particular amount of time are being released unprepared? Have we failed them?
That is why I stepped forward. Because what I see is I see an opportunity here for us to bring the resources that we have. This is not we need more money. This is a reprioritization of resources so that addiction treatment, mental health counseling, education, job training, life skills, all of those kinds of tools that we can't assume people have. I mean, they made bad decisions, they did bad things, they ended up in the criminal justice system, and we can't assume if we warehouse them and then let them back out on the street, they're automatically going to be better. We have an obligation to figure out what they need and start that process and use those resources to do that. This is not novel thinking. Other sheriff's offices in the Commonwealth are doing this work. They are prioritizing their resources towards correction, rehabilitation, and treatment, and making efforts to deal with mental illness and addiction. It's not, it's said often, but it's true. Our jails have become our de facto mental health and addiction treatment places. We were around when they closed all of the facilities.
Yeah.
And we didn't replace them with services. So there are many places along the way that things are lacking. But at our jails, we have the best opportunity to start to address some of those concerns because people are there 24/7 and we have the resources.
Having worked in the sheriff's office 4 years, you said, correct?
Yes.
As general counsel, you have institutional knowledge of the office. You know what it's like to be there and what's going on. And you speak of a need for change. In your experience, how much disruption do you think there will be with somebody coming in and making changes to what may have been going on for so long under the same type of methodology, if you will?
So I don't look at it as disruptive.
Yeah.
I look at my candidacy as the opportunity to elect someone who has the ability to go into the job on day one and start the work. I do know the organization. I know what's working. Mm-hmm. I know what we can improve upon. And I started that work when I worked there. I mean, I worked there and change was part of my job.
Yeah.
When I started working there, we had just passed the Criminal Justice Reform Act in 2018. The state legislature passed some, pretty extensive pieces that required organizational change within the sheriff's department, and I was a part of that. Mm-hmm. We passed the police officers' standards and training, police reform in 2021. I was a part of that. I brought to the office on my own, one of the humorous things about my work at the sheriff's office was I would frequently say, it's not like this over the bridge. We need to update our phone system. I digitized and brought in the process to digitize our policies and procedures so that they weren't a paper record keeping.
Yeah.
I brought my skills to the table to design and implement a medication-assisted treatment program. And I bring to the table the skills and the experience to be able to work with people to accomplish priorities and change. So I don't view it as disruptive,
Yeah.
but what I do view as dangerous is doing the same thing.
Yeah. You have an impressive legal background, particularly in public safety. Can you give me an example of a circumstance where you differed in opinion with Sheriff Cummings? Was there ever a time you guys sat around the table and he said, this is the way it's going to be, or maybe his administration said this, and as general counsel, you're saying, whoa, timeout, not going to happen. Can you give me an example of any of those types of challenges?
Well, one that we've talked about is in 2018, as a result of the Criminal Justice Reform Act, the legislature was giving to the sheriff's offices the nudge, if you will, to implement medication-assisted treatment. And in Barnstable, the Sheriff Cummings was a pioneer back in 2012 when he instituted the Vivitrol program.
Mm-hmm. Tell people what that is.
Vivitrol is a form of medication-assisted treatment for addiction that acts as a blocker. So it blocks the urge. And he implemented a program to use that. But that was 2012. And in 2021, there were many other tools available. In 2018, the legislature was looking to make sure that our jails included those tools. And Barnstable did not. And I had conversations with Sheriff Cummings about that and about the options available. But the sheriff is the person who's elected by the people, and it is his decision as to how he's going to approach those challenges. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we had a different sense as to whether or not that should be part of the tools available, we had a difference of opinion. But that's what he was elected to do. He was elected to make that decision. Yeah. Ultimately, the U.S. Attorney's Office indicated that's not an option anymore. You have to include those tools to be compliant with the ADA. So that's that's what I think is at stake in this election, is the philosophy of who we are electing to look forward for the next 6 years. And I bring to the table, and I try to be as specific as possible about what I see the sheriff's office role in the next 6 years as. We can't look backwards. This isn't, this isn't a conversation between myself and Sheriff Cummings. It's a conversation between myself and Tim Whalen. And what does he want to do with the $30 million budget, with the 300 and something employees, and with the structure that's currently there? And what does that look like for us in Barnstable County? I am trying to be as clear with the voters as is possible about what I see the role of the sheriff's office and how it can contribute meaningfully to public safety.
You refer to mission creep. Explain what that is in your mind.
So I think about it this way. We have a $30 million budget, plus or minus. There's some grant money in there, but let's use that as an example. And if our core mission is correction, rehabilitation, and treatment, if our core mission is inmate focused, then we have to make sure that we are doing that job to the very best that we can before we make a determination as to whether or not we can support deviations from that mission or things that don't enhance that mission. And I have been very upfront about the fact that I feel like the boat, the Marine unit that the sheriff's office supports, doesn't contribute to the core mission, and in fact takes away resources from the core mission. So from my perspective, leadership is about priorities. It is about our ability to understand what is our core mission, what do we owe to the citizens and the residents of Barnstable County, what's our responsibility to the inmates who are sent to us. And then from there, make sure we do that job, and then figure out what else can we do. There are other parts of the sheriff's office that contribute significantly to Barnstable County. The PSAP, our Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Those things, I look forward to the opportunity to modernize and professionalize and dig into those, but the primary mission has to be satisfied first.
On your website, you say that you call for the need to, quote, build real public safety in Barnstable County. What does real public safety mean? So, when you think about the jail, the sheriff has no say over who comes in. That's decided by the court. Right.
So either the court sends someone for no bail, or they set bail that someone can't meet, or they sentence someone for a crime. So the sheriff doesn't pick who comes, and the sheriff doesn't get to decide when they leave. The sheriff does have a responsibility for correction, rehabilitation, and treatment. That's the core mission of our sheriff. We are not safe if we are not attending to that mission and people are coming out of the jail because the courts say when they're released. The courts will say this person's eligible to be let out on the street. If we're putting people back out into the street with an untreated addiction, no job, no housing, no job skills, no prospects, no support, if we have, by the fact that we incarcerated them, made their condition the same or worse, then what's going to happen? They're going to commit more crimes, there are going to be more victims, and we are not safe. I have personally been a victim of that circumstance, where someone is committing crimes, repeat crimes, stealing jewelry, selling it, melting it down, to buy drugs. That's not public safety. I'm not safe. And it's different than law enforcement. The police are on the street. They'll pull you over if you're, breaking the speed limit or operating under the influence, and they're going to deal with people who are in the public.
Yeah.
The sheriff's job starts when the police job ends. And the public safety piece of what the sheriff does is making sure that we don't have a revolving door and that we give people the the circumstance where they can be held accountable for their bad acts, pay their debt, and move on.
So when let's unpack what it looks like on the inside of a correctional facility. There are employees that are there to rehabilitate people, education. Tell me what that looks like. How does that? What is the system in the correctional facility that is helping someone get prepared, and what's not happening specifically? So
I guess maybe it's helpful if I describe to you what I think it should look like.
Fair enough.
Okay, so there is of primary importance the safety and security of the inmates and the staff. No one can do any work if security is an issue.
Right.
So we have an obligation to make sure our staff have the very best tools and resources to do their job, and we have to make sure that the people who have been incarcerated are safe from themselves and from others.
Right.
So that's sort of one lane. And at the same time, not subservient, but at the same time, we have that obligation to use the time while people are incarcerated to put them off, to anticipate that they're going to be released and provide those tools and resources. So I see a side-by-side of safety and security and robust, meaningful staff who are part of the sheriff's operation, not there as volunteers or grant-funded primarily, to provide risk needs assessments. Working with the inmates, risk needs assessments, figuring out where they're at, what kind of job skills do they have, what kind of education do they have special education needs, what's their home life, what are their traumas, can they be released back home? A million different kinds of analysis that informs them then what kind of services we're going to attend to in-house, and what kind of community partners, of which there are many, are we going to hook up with while people are incarcerated, so that we can all start to begin this plan for this person to be released in a better position than when they came in. So I see those working side by side.
Okay.
In the criminal justice reform bill, I guess just to give you an example, that bill set the threshold of being time in a cell at 22 hours. Meaning it's okay for someone to be in a cell for 22 hours. That in and of itself would suggest to me that they're going to have trouble succeeding when we release them. If we don't, even though we can keep them in a cell for 22 hours, we shouldn't.
Yeah.
So I am looking at a visual that has those things side by side, so that there is much more engagement. I'm also, and I've said this on my website, right from the beginning, the staff need to have training that's relevant to today's challenges. And today's challenges are evolving as we speak. This crisis of mental illness that we are dealing with. There was just a Kaiser Family Foundation poll that came out. 90% of Americans believe that we have a mental illness crisis. 90% of Americans don't agree on anything.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
And where's it playing out? In our jails.
Yeah.
So we can't be blind to that.
Is there an appetite for change, though, in that? We all kind of want to come together and look at this differently, but is it like an old school network down there that is never going to kind of get it on their own, or is it a Donna Buckley that needs to come in and say, okay, we got to think things differently?
This is not me by myself. As a matter of fact, the reason that I got into this race was because of the need. This is not something, I have never felt from day one that this was sort of something I was bringing. It was more a reflection of what I was hearing and what I was seeing. I saw it in the Criminal Justice Reform Bill. I saw that the state legislature, and I saw what other sheriff's offices were doing, and I was able to see how that differed from what we were doing in Barnstable and how our focus was different.
Yeah. How much is funding an issue?
I'll never say you don't need more money. But right now, as I go back, I talk about reprioritizing. So I'm just going to use the example of the boat. The boat costs something. And that something can be reprioritized. The decision to send correctional officers to be trained as municipal police officers costs something, both in bodies at a place that's already short-staffed, and in time and resources and money. And that takes away from our supporting our staff who are left behind. Right. So I think there's an ability to reprioritize, not necessarily waiting for someone to give us more money.
You mentioned that you want to end the 287G agreement between the Sheriff's Office and ICE. You say it doesn't make us, Barnstable County, safer. What is the 287G agreement, and why do you feel so strongly about this?
So the 287G agreement is a section of a law that allowed, or that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency entered into an agreement with our Sheriff's Office to deputize Barnstable County employees to do the work of ICE, which is civil work. You mentioned earlier that the word, I used the word, but you brought it up here, mission creep. For me, that's another example of where we are doing things other than the core mission. You know, if we are operating a boat that has nothing to do with public safety, if we are doing the work of ICE, which is civil work, if we are trying to train correction officers to be police officers, those are all, for me, it's thematic. You know, we are focusing on things other than what we should be focusing on. And the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agreement is not a public safety issue, because the people that are being released by the court. So whether you are an undocumented immigrant or whatever your status is, the court is saying to the sheriff's office, you can't hold this person anymore. So what difference does it make what their immigration status is from the job of the sheriff? That might be the job of ICE, but it's not the job of the sheriff.
So you're tethering back to the mission. And the mission is not a very long mission. I mean, it's not as if it's the Constitution and there can be interpretation in there. It's very simple from what I saw, but it is the component of caring for those who are incarcerated.
It is, and I don't mean it to be simplistic, because it is not only complex, but again, from my perspective, and I think from what I have heard across the Cape, and as we just live in today's world, it is the most critical mission. People are dying. People are dying in our jails. People are dying when they are released from our jails. People are dying as a result of people we release from our jails. So we can't keep our head in the sand and say that we can continue to do the same thing for 6 more years. We are not safe when we are taking away someone's liberty, putting them in a difficult situation of incarceration, which they put themselves in. But it was never intended to punish. It was never intended to be a warehousing situation, and it was always intended to use the old school, like my parents, you know, learn your lesson. Well, if we have to learn the lesson, we have to do so in the context of today's challenges. Because 60 to 80% of the people are dealing with addiction and mental illness. They're committing crimes because of those diseases. Most of the people in our jail are not the violent criminals. Most of the people in our jail are there because they are the product, their acts are the product of addiction and mental illness. So we have to face that.
Should you win this office, you will be the first woman to be the sheriff in Barnstable County. What does that mean to you?
I have a sort of conflicted answer about that. It is significant to me. It is significant because at present, all of the 15 sheriffs in Massachusetts are male. So it is significant. One of the things that factored into my decision to run was that I have 2 granddaughters. And as I look forward, I think I would love to be today in a world, this is my conflict, where that didn't matter, that wasn't the question. That we looked at the candidates for this job with regard to what do they bring from their brain and what do they bring from their heart, not what gender they are. Because what we need is someone who understands the job, has the passion for the job, is able to walk in and do the job on day one, and if it shouldn't matter whether that person is male or female.
Right. You have, counselor, closing arguments. I'm giving you closing arguments. I'm always concerned about voters showing up at the polls, and I've done this in my life as well, where they show up and they're like, oh, yeah, sheriff, I'll check him. I'll check her. It's just kind of, they don't pay attention to it. So I'm one of the reasons why I like to do this is I like to understand and help other people understand why it's important. So you're really you're shooting over the bow, not to make a boat reference, but shooting a warning over the bow that there's a public safety issue with this race. And that you actually, you really believe that. Tell a voter out there that otherwise will say, I don't know, sheriff, I don't know, should I really be impassioned about this? What would you say to that person to say, get out, vote, and this is an important race?
Oh my, that could take another half hour here.
Yeah, right.
So the first challenge with this election is understanding what the role of the sheriff is. We haven't talked about it for 24 years. It's not one of the top of the ballot races, so there's not a lot of discussion about it, and I'm truly grateful that we can have this conversation. So one priority is to make sure, I tell people, make sure that you understand what the job is that you're electing someone to do. Because the fallback is to vote on a stereotype. The old-fashioned, the Old West sheriff is a guy with a badge and a gun and a uniform and a hat, and it's a guy. So that must be what our sheriff is, and since there's only one male here, then we must vote for him. Or he's a police officer, or was, so we must vote for him. So it's really important to understand what's the job. And then, and this is where I know that this is not me looking for change, but rather me creating or working to have a sheriff office that's reflective of what people want, is that I haven't met anyone across the Cape who isn't touched by the issues of addiction and mental illness. So whether you are the victim, or your family member, or you have hit bottom and been incarcerated, or you're a grandparent raising your grandchild, all of that goes, or you are sick of having your tax dollars wasted. All of that goes back to our sheriff's office. It's a 6-year job, it's a $30 million budget, and it impacts us every single day. From the homeless people who are living in the woods in Hyannis and Falmouth, Are they the people that we are releasing from the jail with no place to go? To the people who are overdosing in our streets? Are they the people who are coming out of our jail without the supports they need? Are you the next victim of a crime?
Yeah.
So this touches all of us every day.
So why vote for Donna Buckley? Let's end on that note. Closing argument.
I am asking to be your next Barnstable County Sheriff, not because I'm a politician, but because I have the knowledge, the skills, the education, the experience, and the vision to walk in on day one and start the work of focusing our sheriff's office on correction, rehabilitation, and treatment. That is the biggest return on our investment. That is the sacred mission of the sheriff that only the sheriff can perform, and I have the experience to do that job.
Attorney Donna Buckley, thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg.
I'm so glad you came in. Hopefully, this discussion has shed light on a different perspective as it relates to this race. I thank Donna Buckley for coming in, and I hope you, every one of you, get out and vote on November 8th. This is an important race. I'm Greg Anderson. I'll see you soon.
The views expressed in this program are the views of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the SCTV staff or board of directors.